Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching a lesson on implementing patch management. Now, when it comes to patch management, what we're really talking about is a tool called WSUS. Okay, so that's the tool that we're going to talk about pretty much throughout this lesson. So what is this WSUS? Well, let's first of all talk about what the letters stand for. WSUS stands for Windows Server Update Services. And before we get too deep into it, I will also tell you that if you've worked with Windows servers going into the past, years ago, we had something that was originally just called SUS, just SUS, okay? And that was Software Update Services. Then from there, it evolved into WUS, or WUS, and that was Windows Update Services. And it was kind of funny because at the time, WUS, a lot of people would mispronounce it and say, what's this WUS thing? And that didn't sound very friendly. So it fairly quickly went from SUS to WS, and then almost right away, it was just a matter of months, I believe, it moved into WSUS, which is Windows Server Update Services. So now that you know the history of where that came from over the years, let's talk about what it does. Well, here, if we look at the screen, you'll see that I have an emulated typical network, right? Just a representation of a very basic network where you have a bunch of clients, right? They're all connected internally, and then you have a router to the internet, and out on the internet, you have Microsoft's update server, right? And then each of these clients, well, they have Windows Update, right? That's something that's on every Microsoft operating system. You have Windows Update. This is where your different updates come from. These days, some of the most important updates are the security-based updates. And on a regular basis, each of these clients will go out onto the internet, connect with Microsoft's update server, and see if there are any updates. And if there are, they download them and get them installed. You would see this even on your home computer. Okay, because like I said, it's all Microsoft operating systems. Even if you're working with a home operating system, your computer will have updates configured. Now, those updates can be configured in many different ways. Okay, those updates can be configured so that it's completely manual. In other words, a user would have to specifically say, hey, let's go out there and see if there's any updates. Or it can be set up so that the computer will automatically go out and ask to see if there's any updates, but then you would have to decide if you were going to download and install them or not, manually. Or a third choice is it can go out there, look for updates. If it finds out that there's updates, and this is all happening automatically again, it can download them, but then you, the user, would still have to be prompted to install them. And then there's, of course, the Microsoft recommended way, which is to have the whole thing automated, right? Just have every single computer go out automatically and, periodically check to see if there's any updates. And if there are, they then download those updates and install those updates at a scheduled time. So, since this all happens and we have the ability to do it automatically, aren't we pretty much just done, right? Isn't that the end of it? Right? Hey, that was a good lesson. See you later. See you in the next one. No, that's not it. Because here's the problem. In your home environment, that might be fine. But in a corporate environment, there's a lot of problems with this. The first problem is, bandwidth, right? Just pure internet bandwidth. If each one of these clients has to go out and connect with Windows, servers, on their own independently to get the same update, well, that's a lot of bandwidth, whereas maybe that update didn't need to come down to each and every machine again and again and again and again. Another problem that we have is, have you ever been in an environment where an update came from Microsoft and then bad things started happening to the computer? Yeah, it happens. If you've never experienced it, I'm telling you, it does happen. So in a corporate environment, this can be a problem because if you have every single machine in the place, overnight install an update from Microsoft automatically, and there happens to be something wrong with that update, guess what? There's no business the next day because the only business you're going to be dealing with is fixing all those computers. And that has happened, I assure you. Okay, so those are a couple of huge problems that we have. So taking those problems into consideration, we can do something as simple as implement a WSUS server. Okay, so if we take that WSUS server, what's basically going to happen here, it's sitting on the internal network. And when I say internal, it doesn't have to literally be internal. Some people will choose to put the WSUS server, we'll say in like a DMZ, right, or a perimeter network, so that it's shielded. Since it's the one that's actually going out and communicating on the internet, we want to shield it from the actual internal network for security reasons. But it has connectivity, and it's accessible from the internal network. And the idea is that one WSUS server will now go out to Microsoft's update server. So you just have one communication going out onto the internet, saving a lot of bandwidth. It will get any and all updates that are available. Then from there, you, the administrator, has to approve those updates before that update can go any further than the WSUS server. So this way, you have the opportunity to test the updates before all the clients get it. Now, the clients, they will all be configured to go out and still do their automatic updates the same way that we described originally, right? The same way where you have your four choices. It can either be completely manual, it can be certain degrees of automated, or even completely automated. But the communication will not be with Microsoft's update server, it'll be with the WSUS server. So that way you're moving all of the update management in-house. Now here's something that is new in Windows Server 2012, and that is that WSUS is a built-in server role. There is no additional update or download necessary. SUS, WUS, and WSUS has gone through many revisions over the years, and a lot of those revisions, came very quickly, one after the other, and that may continue to happen. So even when you're watching this, right now as I'm recording this, the latest version is available, built right into Windows Server 2012. There may be a newer version that will be released by the time you're watching this, and well, that's fine. You just go out to Microsoft's website and you download the latest and greatest. I don't believe that is the intent going forward, though. I believe Microsoft's intent is that any update would be included as part of an update to the operating system, or maybe even built into a service pack that you would do on Windows Server 2012. But again, I can only tell you what I know standing here right now today. Things change over time. Now again, as I was just describing to you, WSUS gives administrators control over what updates are sent out to the clients, allowing them to test them and approve them before clients are allowed to have them. And again, we get to save on our internet bandwidth and makes much more efficient use of the Microsoft update servers. Okay, I guess that's another thing. I mentioned the bandwidth almost as though it's from our own selfish perspective, right? Our own company's perspective. Well, it also is making life better for Microsoft with their update servers if instead of having to get, thousands and thousands of requests within just a single company, they could get a single request from within that company. Their servers can then be much more efficient as well. And again, if we want to turn that around into a selfish thing, because who cares about Microsoft, right? I mean, it's I'm the customer, I'm the one paying for this. That's their problem. Well, it still becomes your own problem, because if the Windows, Microsoft update servers become overwhelmed, well, that could be longer and slower before you can get your updates. So anyway, that is basically WSUS in a nutshell. So why don't we go ahead and jump over to our operating system environment, and well, let's see how it's actually installed and configured. Okay, so here we are out on one of our servers. Now I have 3 servers currently set up in my environment. I have 2 domain controllers. One of them is called NYDC1 and the other one's called NYDC2. And I have 1 member server, and that's what we're looking at right here, NYMem1, and you can see that from the tab up top here. The significance of these servers is that pretty much this is your very basic domain environment, your basic corporate environment. Right? We have our globalmantics.local domain in our corporate headquarters for GlobalMantics, And the 2 domain controllers is really just to be redundant, okay, because you never want to have just one if you have the resources to have 2. And then, of course, a member server. And I'm going to show you that, I personally think that patch management is something that should be isolated. You can do it on a domain controller. I don't personally recommend it. Obviously, if you're in a small business environment where you only have the means for a single server, well, that's fine. I can tell you that in the past, we had small business server where WSUS was, used on that one single server along with the domain controller. But when you can separate it out, I personally recommend that. So for that reason, I'm going to work on this member server here. And as I mentioned a moment ago, WSUS is a server role, and server roles are installed with the server manager. So let's go ahead and click to open up our server manager. And then here in Server Manager, it'll take just a moment as it all loads up here. It looks like it has completed. I'm going to go ahead and click on Add Roles and Features. Then from there, it is going to be a role-based installation because we're installing a role. So I'll click Next. We have to decide what server we're installing onto. We're going to install onto this server, New York Mem 1. Click Next. Then from there, if I scroll down to the bottom, and it's actually the very bottom, here we have Windows Server Update Services. So I'm going to check that box, and when I do, and this is very similar to what we've seen with pretty much any and all other roles that we install, Microsoft automatically evaluates the system and says, if you want to be a WSUS server, you are going to need these additional items. And if you take a look at some of this, you need to have .NET Framework. Almost all the tools end up saying there's some kind of a remote server administration tool that's being included, right? It's the actual interface, the actual GUI tool that you're installing. For WSUS, you'll see here that you also have to have web services. You have to be a web server. And the process activation service, okay? So these are all things that you're going to need. But here's the good news. You don't necessarily have to have that all memorized, because in the old days, you would. Okay, back 10 years ago, if I'm teaching you this, I'm actually teaching you, you need to go in and install each of these things first before you're allowed to be a WSUS server. Now, it's saying, hey, you need this stuff. Do you want it? And if you do, just click Add Features. So I'm going to click that button, and sure enough, it adds that stuff in. If I click Next, I have the opportunity for any other features I want to install because this is roles and features installation. I don't need anything else, only the stuff that it's telling me I need. I'll click on Next. Now it goes into a little mini portion of this wizard where it talks about WSUS itself and what it is. And then if I go forward, you'll see here that there's the WID database. This installs the database that's used by WSUS. Okay, so it takes this data, or I should really say it installs the database used by WSUS into a WID. You have WSUS services itself, which installs the service used by Windows Server Update Services update service. Does that sound like redundant? It's doing the Windows Server Update Services, but then it's also doing the update services. But you'll notice there's a bunch of other things it's doing. The reporting web service, API remoting web service, client web service, simple web authentication, web service, server synchronization service, and the DSS authentication web service. Whew, that was a mouthful. Well, here's the deal. All of these services, again, do you have to have this memorized? Do you need to be overly concerned with it? No, you really don't. Okay, I mean, the bottom line is you take this and you install it, and these are all the supporting services that are needed to make this process that we're trying to, explain here, this process of being able to have an internal Microsoft update server, basically, well, it needs all these services to have that functionality. So we'll go ahead and click on Next. All right, so now this screen is where you get to choose, and this is kind of another neat little feature regarding WSUS, and that is you could just simply use WSUS for the purpose of approving, but not necessarily to save on the bandwidth. There are scenarios where you would go ahead and create an internal WSUS server, and you will still decide what updates you're going to approve and send out to your clients, but you won't have the clients get those updates from you. The clients will still, on their own, independently go out and communicate with the Microsoft Update Server to get the update. Okay, now if you're trying to think, when the heck would I ever do that? I'll give you one scenario where this works, and that is, what if you have a lot of remote users, right? You have users who just occasionally connect into the local office, but they are somewhere else. Or maybe you have a remote office and you don't want to put a WSUS server out there. You just want to have the one WSUS server in your main office. So it really isn't saving you any bandwidth if those clients are either going to have to go across the internet to get to your WSUS server, or across maybe a slow WAN link to get to your WSUS server. Then all they have to do is connect to the WSUS server long enough to be told, these are the updates that you're supposed to get. Then from there, the clients will go out to the Microsoft Update Server and actually download the updates straight from there. Okay, so here's where it's saying you're going to store them in the following location, and you choose a valid path on this particular server, or you can even put it in a remote path, right? You want to put it into a shared folder that you have out there somewhere. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and I'm just going to say, how about right on the root of my C drive? I'm going to go ahead and C:// and let's just do updates. And I'll click next. Now, there's a little bit more that we have to go through. We're actually done with the WSUS part, but there's the web server role that needs to be installed. So at this point, I'm going to really just click next, finish. And the reason why is because, again, these features and roles are only being installed to support WSUS, which means everything is going to be set up properly. All the correct boxes will be checked. All the different boxes you see checked here, these are all the things you actually need to do WSUS. So I'm just going to click next, and then here's a confirmation. I'm going to go ahead and say, yep, that's everything I want to do, and I'm going to click install. Now, something you've heard me say before, if you've watched any of my other lessons and any of my other courses, is depending on the speed of your computer and what all else is going on it, this will take longer on some and shorter on others. So what I'm going to do is, through the magic of video editing, I'm going to speed this up. And if you're following along, it's probably not going to go as fast as it does on my end. So go ahead and pause the lesson here and then resume once this process has completed, because we're going to continue really quick here. Okay, so as you can see here, the process has finished in the sense that it says right here, the installation succeeded on NYMem1, but it says configuration is still required. And if you look down here, it actually says additional configuration must be performed before continuing. Launch post-installation tasks. All right, well, let's do that right from here. And when I click on that, it says please wait while your server is configured. And again, if you're following along, I sped that up a little bit. It did take a few moments here, so just go ahead and hit pause if you're not at the point where I'm at yet. But here it says configuration has successfully completed. And at this point, I can close out of this wizard. You'll see that WSUS has been added, right? I see it over here on the left, I see it down here. And most importantly, if I click on Tools, I can also see that all the way down here at the bottom, I have Windows Server Update Services. So let's go ahead and click on that. Let's go into the utility itself. And the first thing we get is the Windows Server Update Services configuration wizard. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we need to do. First of all, before you begin, is this server firewall configured to allow clients to access the server? Okay, you have to keep in mind that if you're going to be an update server, clients have to be able to reach you. Can this computer connect to the upstream server? Now, I want to talk to you about this upstream server, because the upstream server could be what it says right here, Microsoft Update, but it also could be another WSUS server. That is another thing to keep in mind. When you get to the large enterprise environments, you might want to create a hierarchy of these WSUS servers, in the sense that you'll have one that goes out to Microsoft, and then that one has all the updates for the entire enterprise. And then maybe each location in your enterprise, and that's just one hypothetical, and it could be each department, it could be whatever. But we'll say each location has their own WSUS server, and that WSUS server will then get their updates from the one central main WSUS server that got it from Windows Update. Okay, so that's another way. And actually, I'm going to take that one step further, and I'm going to tell you that there's two versions of that scenario. One version is where the decisions are all centrally made. In other words, that one main central WSUS server communicates with Microsoft Update Server, gets the updates, and the updates are all approved at that point. Okay, so all the control as to what can go out to the company as a whole is all done centrally, and then each of the other WSUS servers are only there just to distribute the load. Or the other scenario is where each of those WSUS servers can have their own administrator who approves updates. So the one central WSUS server is just for the sake of having a central repository for all of those updates, so that you only have to go out to Microsoft Update once, and then each of the independent WSUS servers would get those updates, and then the approval would be done at that one individual level. Okay, so that is something else to keep in mind. But can this computer connect to the upstream server? Yep, this one it can. I do have internet access here, so I can connect with Microsoft Update. And if there is a proxy server in the way, do you have the credentials necessary for that? So these are things you got to keep in mind before we even move forward. So since I have this all in place, I'll just go ahead. And since I know I'm good with these items, I'm just going to go ahead and click Next. This is asking me if I want to join the Microsoft Update Improvement Program. Okay, this is just in general information, no distinguishing information to identify you or your company is sent, but just information about how the process is working is sent to Microsoft so they can improve Windows Server Update services in the future. Might not be a bad idea. These types of things have proven to be quite beneficial. I'm going to clear the checkbox, and the reason why, I always do this when I'm in my test environments and my learning environments, because what I'm doing is not necessarily the typical, and so I don't think it's fair for Microsoft to be trying to analyze data off of this test environment. Okay, but if I was in a production environment, I might be willing to do it. So I'll click Next. Now this is where I get to choose the upstream server. Okay, so I can either synchronize from Microsoft Update, which is what I'm going to have to do here, because I don't have another server to go to. Or if I was going to use that hierarchy that I talked about, I could synchronize from another WSUS server. And you go ahead and give it a name, the port number, and decide if you want SSL, so you can have all kinds of secure communications. And then is this going to be a replica? Okay, where it mirrors the update approval settings, computers and groups from the parent, which means that the updates are only approved on the parent level. Or if we leave that box unchecked, that means no, the parent can approve just what I get, but then I get to then approve what goes out to my clients. So I'm going to go ahead and say synchronize from Microsoft Updates, the only option I have. Click Next. If I need a proxy server, I could go ahead and put the proxy server information in here. Okay, there is no proxy server to connect between me and the internet or me and the Microsoft Update server, so I can just leave that blank and click Next. And at this point, to configure WSUS on the following screens, we need to apply your upstream server and proxy server settings and synchronous information about the updates. So at this point, it's saying, in order to go any further, we have to connect with that upstream server. So I can click this button, it says Start Connecting Now. And again, depending on the speed of your system, the speed of your internet access, the availability of the Microsoft Update server, and so on and so forth. I guess we could add to that, how many updates might be out there waiting to be grabbed hold of by the server. This process can take, a few moments to, I've actually seen this process take, 30 minutes before. So again, I'm going to go ahead and speed this up so that you don't have to sit here and stare at this little bar going across the screen forever. We'll make this happen quickly. But on your end, if you are following along, go ahead and pause the lesson and resume as soon as we get on to the next step. Okay, so that initial configuration has finished. I can go ahead and click Next. And now I get to choose the languages that I'm going to be supporting. All right, so if you are supporting an international organization, there may be more than one language that you want to support. Okay, in my case, I'm only going to support English, so I can just leave that how it is and click Next. And now I get to choose the products that I want to support. And I do want to caution you here. If you decide to take the lazy approach and just say all products, that's a lot of information that you're going to be storing on your system that you probably don't have to. Okay, so that's a lot of resources you're tying up, most likely needlessly. Okay, so you really do want to take the time to look through here and say, here's an example. Hold on, there we go. It's scrolling faster than I can keep up with it. Sorry, if it's jumping on your screen, it's not you. I'm actually jumping around here. The example I was going to give was Exchange. If you are not hosting Exchange internally, right? If you don't have any Exchange servers, well, then why would you download and store updates for Exchange Server? Okay, so if I continue scrolling down here, what I'm looking for is Windows. All right, so maybe I have some Windows 7 clients, maybe I have some Windows 8 clients. You'll see here, here's Windows 2000. If I continue scrolling down, here's some of our servers, right? You have Windows Server 2003, Windows Server 2008, Windows Server 2012. I'll go ahead and check that box for Windows Server 2012. And actually, just for the sake of time, I'll do Windows 8. I'm going to not do Windows 7. Okay, I'm going to do just the most current stuff, which would be Windows 8 and Windows Server 2012. You'll notice, however, it does go back even like to Windows XP, at least for now, right? As long as we still have support for Windows XP. Okay, but that's pretty much, look at that huge list of stuff. You want to make sure you pay attention to what systems do you have on your network that are going to need to be updated. So I'll go ahead and click Next. Now I can choose what type of updates I want. Do I want to bring down critical updates? Do I want to bring down definition updates? Do I want to bring down drivers? Right? That's a big one. Some people choose to actually get drivers from Windows Update, and other places choose to explicitly not ever get drivers from Windows Update. Okay, so something you can do there. There's feature packs. This is the box I recommend being checked more than anything else, security updates. I'd probably include that along with the critical updates as the two most important. Obviously, definition updates being third in line. That's why these three are checked by default. We can choose if we want service packs to automatically synchronize, other tools, update rollups, and updates. Okay, so you can choose what you want to synchronize. I'm going to leave it with the default, with the three most important. Click Next. Now we go ahead and choose a synchronization schedule where we can synchronize manually. You can choose, okay, wait a minute, I'm going to manually, on this update server, decide when I go out to Microsoft Update and see if there's any updates. Or I could synchronize automatically, specify a time. It seems to be a little bit random, 1:06 and 28 seconds. 1 o'clock in the morning, but not exactly 1 o'clock, 1:06:28. I'm going to go ahead and do my first synchronization. I believe that is an exact amount of time from where I am right now on my system. I'd have to do the math. I think that's about 10 hours from now. I don't think that's completely random. And then you can decide how often. Do I want to synchronize once a day? Or all the way up to 24 times a day, which means obviously once an hour. You'll also notice here that it says when scheduling daily synchronization, the synchronization start time will have a random offset up to 30 minutes after the specified time. And the reason it's doing this is just to make sure, again, if there's a lot of systems that all are configured at the same time, they're all going to be trying to go out at the same time. So by having that random offset, we stagger things so it's not all happening at the same time. All right, so for right now, I'm just going to go ahead and say go ahead and matter of fact, I'm going to synchronize manually. Because this is just a learning environment, it's not a production environment, I don't want to have it continue to keep doing this automatically. But in a production environment, you would synchronize automatically. I'll click Next. And look at this. You like that, right? Green circle, check box in it. You've now finished configuring your WSUS server. You can go on to launch the WSUS Administration Council or start the initial synchronization. If I want, I can do an initial synchronization right now, and it's going to go ahead and, it warns you this is going to take some time. And it also depends on the number of products and classifications and languages that you decided you want to go ahead and do this. So I'll go ahead and click Next. And it goes on to say, well, what's next? Next steps to fully configure your system would be decide if you want to use SSL for security. You can create computer groups. Okay, this is something that we typically would want to do. Creating a computer group is so that you can categorize different systems on your network to get different types of updates. All right, you might have certain computers. Let's say, just to simplify, let's take all our computers and you divide them into two groups. One group being clients, one group being servers, right? Maybe we just take all our servers, put them in one group, all our clients into another, and then we can determine and approve updates for them separately. We can assign the computers to those groups using group policy and configure automatic approval rules. There are certain updates that you may want to auto approve and not wait for the administrator. Maybe security updates, for instance. You may go ahead and want to say, hey, I want those automatically approved. Okay, so these are some of the additional things that you can do with WSUS. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Finish. And you'll see that it takes me into the Update Services Council. From here, again, what are some of the things that we can do? Here we have computers. We have all computers. You'll see there's unassigned computers. That would be anybody who doesn't fall into a specific computer group. Or I can right click and I can say add a computer group. This is where I go ahead and create the name of the group. Okay, so we're not going to go through all these steps all the way through. These are fairly obvious steps as far as how to go through them. Just want to show you the basics on where you find it. Here under updates, if I click on all updates, there's not really anything in here yet because it's in the hourglass there, and that's because we're still in the process of doing our initial synchronization. It will take quite some time before this actually becomes something that I could go through and approve some updates. But this is where I would go through and I could find various updates, critical, security, WSUS updates, and over here in the window I would go ahead and you basically highlight them, right click, and approve them. Here we have downstream servers. Okay, so if any other WSUS server is looking to this server for updates, it would be there. Here's where we can see synchronizations. Okay, so there is a synchronization that has been run. And actually, it looks like it's completed and it's succeeded, but there are no new updates. Okay, so I would have to wait until something new came in for me to be able to show you the approval of the update. That's part of why I'm saying it's fairly intuitive. You right click, you say approve. There are various reports that you can create. Okay, there are built-in update and computer reports, and these are reports, and actually there's a third one with synchronization, and these are the reports that help you to know, okay, what's been going on with synchronization, and what updates are here, what updates have been approved, what updates are waiting to be approved, how many updates have we been approving, all the various computers out there. Are they, these are computers on the network, are they actually, what percentage of them are up to date, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is just kind of the basics of working with WSUS itself. Now, there is something else that's very important to this whole thing, and I'm going to actually close out of here, and I'm actually going to leave New York Mem 1, and I'm going to jump over to New York DC 1, and here on New York DC 1, on our domain controller, the one last thing that I want to show you, and I'm popping into the server manager right now, really for no other reason other than I'm going to jump into another tool, and it's become a habit very quickly for me that you access everything from the Server Manager. That tool that we're going to go into is the Group Policy Management tool. Now, while we're waiting for that to open up, I'm going to explain to you why. The reason we're going into Group Policy Management is because this is all fine and dandy that I set up a WSUS server on our network. The problem is all those clients on my network, well, they don't know that I exist, right? They don't know that NYMem1 is an update server, and so they're still going to go out to Microsoft Update. So here in Group Policy, okay, so I'll go ahead and expand my forest here and my domains. Here's globalmantics.local. What we need to do is we need to set up group policy that tells the various clients where to go to get their updates. Now, in some environments, you may have everybody just going to the one update server. And if that's the case, you can do it right here on the default domain policy. Oh, now this message just came up is because I clicked on it. The first time you do this, it just gives you a warning that, that any changes you may make these changes somewhere else. This is something related to group policy that we'll learn about later. I'm going to say don't bother me with that anymore. I know what I'm doing. I'll click OK. So you can do the default domain policy, or in an environment where you have different computers who are supposed to be going to different WSUS servers, you would then maybe create a new GPO in the various containers relating to that particular group of computers and what WSUS server is going to go to. So let's go ahead and edit the default domain policy, because we're going to say that everybody's going to go to the same WSUS server. And under computer configuration, under policies, under Windows settings, actually that's wrong, under administrative templates, under Windows components, I can scroll down a little bit here, and actually let me move this over so we can see it. Scroll down a little more. Here we have Windows Update. And this is where we can do, there's a couple of very specific settings. There's a number of them here, as you can see. But specifically, there's this one right here that says Configure Automatic Updates. If I go into it, if I enable it, you'll see here that I have 4 choices, right? I can either notify for download and notify for install, right? So all it's going to do is just check to see if there is something, but then they're just going to be notified, hey, you still need to download, you still need to install. You can download automatically, but notify for the install. Or you can automatically do all of it, right? Auto download it and automatically install based upon a schedule. And that is the recommended way to do it, by the way. I mean, if WSUS is in place, it's fairly safe to have all your clients auto install, because they're only going to get stuff that's been approved by the administrators. Now, the 4th choice is allow the local admin to choose the setting, meaning don't actually configure the client at this point. Have the client be configured on its own. I don't really get that setting a whole lot, because at that point you might as well have just not configured the setting here in the first place. So we'll go ahead and say automatically download and install. And when do you want to install? Every day, or pick a specific day, and then what time of that day or do you want to go ahead and install? Okay, so that's how you would go ahead and say, I want all of my clients to do automatic updating, and I want them to do it at a specific time. The next one is the one right below it. Specify intranet Microsoft Update Service location. So if I go into that one and enable it, you'll see here that we're going to set the intranet update service for detecting updates. And you remember that we had to set up the web server service on the WSUS server? Well, the reason why is because you're going to connect to that server. In other words, the client thinks this is an internet-based service. So we need to go ahead and tell it that we're going to go to http:// and then I'm going to do ny-mem-1. If I could type, globalmantics.local. Okay, so this is where we go ahead and tell it to go ahead and use that server as its Windows Update server. So by doing those 2 settings, we've now made it that every client in the entire globalmantics.local domain, right, because if I close out of here, Remember, that was the default domain policy, so this is going to affect every computer in the domain. They are all now set to automatically download and install updates. I believe we left it to doing it every day at 3 a.m. And we told them to get those updates from NYMem1. So that is pretty much the basics on how you would go ahead and install and configure Windows Server Update Services to go ahead and implement patch management in your system. And that's pretty much all I have for you in this lesson, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.